Hello and welcome to my presentation on the freshwater marsh, floodplain swamp, saltwater marsh, and mangrove ecosystems. So to start, our first ecosystem is the freshwater marsh. The first plant I identified was water lettuce, scientific name Pistia stratiotis. And an interesting fact about water lettuce is that it is thought to be invasive. There's actually still some debate about it. But recently, some seeds were found deep in soil levels that could indicate that the water lettuce has been in Florida for longer than we originally thought. The next plant is dollarweed. I only have the genus and it is hydrocodal. There are a bunch of different species, so it's kind of hard to narrow it down, but you can see that there is dollarweed in the top of this picture, surrounded by a bunch of water lettuce. And an interesting fact about dollarweed is that it is considered endangered in Connecticut and Ohio. Next, we have the beach sunflower, scientific name Helianthus debilis. And the beach sunflower is interesting because the flower heads actually follow the sun throughout the day. Next is beggar tick, scientific name Bidens alba, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen these growing all over their garden or backyard. They're everywhere, but an interesting fact is that they can be used medicinally by adding them to baths, and allegedly it eases skin irritation. Next is Caesar weed, scientific name Urina lobata, and this is an invasive plant which we discussed in our last presentation. But a new fact is that there are currently no known biological controls for it, but people are working towards trying to find a biological control. This beautiful purple flower is known as pickerel weed, scientific name Pontidaria cordata, and pickerel weed has seeds that are edible raw and can be turned into a grain. And this little yellow flower is called marsh cowpea, scientific name Vigla luteola, and marsh cowpea is made up of 25% protein, so it is a wonderful little snack for the cattle that feed on it. Next we have turkey tangle frog fruit, scientific name Phylla nodiflora, and I think that this is the prettiest flower. I love that it has a bunch of different flowers all around it. And an interesting fact about them is that their leaves can be used allegedly to make a tea that can prevent colds. And this is also a great alternative in lawns to grass. It's a wonderful ground cover. Next up is alligator flag, scientific name Thalia geniculata. And alligator flag is native to Florida, and it is a host for the Brazilian skipperfly. Now we've got the seaside primrose willow, scientific name Ludwigia maritima, and I'm not 100% confident in the exact species, but I am sure that this is in the genus Ludwigia. There are a bunch of different flowers in this genus. And this flower occurs from Louisiana to North Carolina and is in almost every single county in Florida. Next, we have the common cattail, scientific name Typha latifolia, and cattails are often the first plants to colonize newly exposed mud. This plant is called dog fennel or sneezeweed, and its scientific name is Eupatorium capillifolium, and dog fennel is actually toxic to birds and mammals, so it might not be the best idea to let your dog eat it. Now we're moving on to the animals. So our first one is the American alligator, scientific name Alligator mississippiensis. And you can see the line being dragged through the sand and the little feet on either side of the tail line. And an interesting fact about alligators is that there are some studies that show that some alligators eat rocks to help them stay submerged underwater longer. Our next animal is the boat-tailed grackle, scientific name Quiscalus major. And the boat-tailed grackle forages mostly in the water, and it feeds on snails, shrimp, tadpoles, and small fish. Next is the turkey vulture, scientific name Cathartus aura. And you can tell that this is a turkey vulture because it has a white line that extends all the way through the wing. Unfortunately, you can't see the white line very well in the picture, but you could see it when you're actually looking at them. but you're just gonna have to take my word for it. And the turkey vulture is actually the only scavenger vulture that cannot kill its own prey. Next up, we have another bird. This ecosystem was just full of birds. So this one is the great blue heron, scientific name Ardea hirodias. And an interesting fact about the great blue heron is that both the mother and father take turns incubating the eggs for 4 weeks. So this is actually a rare time in nature where there is some parental care coming from the father. Next, we have the great egret, scientific name Ardea alba. And the great egret is found on all continents except Antarctica, and in the 1800s they almost went extinct due to the plumage industry. Next, we have the giant apple snail, scientific name Pomacea maculata. The giant apple snail is invasive, and it was actually introduced through aquarium trade. Now we're going to move on to the floodplain swamp. So our first plant is the dollarweed again, and like I said, there are so many different species of dollarweed that I just have the genus, which is hydrocodal. But I do have a different fact for you, and the fact for this dollarweed is that it grows in places with lots of water and it spreads via rhizomes. Our next plant is the air plant, which is in the family Tillandsia, and this is another one of those plants that has so many different species. This family alone contains over 650 different species, so it was hard to narrow it down. But an interesting fact about the Tillandsia family is that the plants in this family use CAM photosynthesis to breathe at night. Next up, we have Arum, scientific name Peltandra virginica, and Arum has rhizomes that are tolerant to low oxygen levels in waterlogged soils. Now we're going to move on to some ferns. This ecosystem had 4 different ferns. So the first one is cinnamon fern, scientific name Osmunda cinnamomea. And cinnamon fern is in the royal fern family and produces separate, sterile, and fertile fronds. Next, we have sword fern or Boston fern, scientific name Nephrolepid exaltata. And this is a fern that is actually a very popular houseplant because it is hard to kill and it isn't very prone to pests or diseases, and it actually has more than 50 different cultivars. Next, we have the cabbage palm fern, scientific name Phlebodium aureum, and this was a fern that we actually saw in the hardwood hammock ecosystem, and it made another appearance in the swamp ecosystem, and it is native to tropical and subtropical Americas, and it requires partial sun and medium humidity to survive. Our last fern is resurrection fern, scientific name Pleopeltis polypodioides, and what you don't know is that was my 6th try trying to say that name. But an interesting fact is that this fern contains dihydrin, which allows the cell walls to deform and reform with fluctuating water levels. Now we're done with the ferns and we're going to move on to some other stuff. So here we have smooth beggartick, scientific name Bidens laevis, and an interesting fact about this smooth beggartick is that its seeds are so heavy that it actually causes the flower to bend over. Next, we have the white swamp milkweed, scientific name Asclepias perennis, and this beautiful flower is the larval host to the monarch, queen, and soldier butterflies. Moving on to a plant that we all know and love, this is the cabbage palm, scientific name Sable palmetto, and I'm sure you already know this fact, but the heart of the plant can actually be eaten, which gives it its name cabbage palm. Moving on, we have Dahoon holly, scientific name Ilex cassin, and Dahoon holly is moderately salt tolerant, and it is also dioecious. Now we have bald cypress, scientific name Taxodium distichum, my personal favorite tree, and this tree can reach up to 600 years old, and I have heard people consider it like the redwoods of the East Coast. And this tree can also grow up to 2 feet in just 1 year. Now that we're done with the plants, we're going to move on to some more animals for this ecosystem. So first we have the fishing spider, which is in the genus Dolomites. And the fishing spider can actually catch small fish from the water and it eats the fish, which is horrifying. Next, we have the Florida leaf-footed bug, scientific name Acanthocephala femerata, and this bug is actually considered a pest because it does major damage to citrus and rose crops. Next, we have the mosquito, scientific name, I don't have the scientific name, I just have the family, which is Solicidae. Unfortunately, it's very hard to get a picture of a mosquito, and it's also very hard to ID it if you don't have a good picture of it. So this is all we've got. But interesting facts about mosquitoes is that they're actually considered the deadliest animal on Earth. Next, we have this feather of a pileated woodpecker, scientific name Dryocopus pileatus, and the pileated woodpecker carves nests in dead trees and is actually not a migratory bird. And our last animal of this ecosystem is the pygmy rattlesnake, scientific name Cistrus miliarius, and the pygmy rattlesnake feeds on insects, frogs, lizards, small snakes, and mice. Last, but certainly not least, we have the salt marsh and mangrove ecosystems. So we're going to start this ecosystem off with an identification that I'm not actually super confident on, but here we have cordgrass. I am sure that it's cordgrass, however, I'm not sure if it's Spartina alterniflora or Spartina patens. Unfortunately, the pictures I took weren't really great at seeing identifications after the fact, but either way, both of these species do act as food plants for the Lepidoptera species of butterflies. Next, we have the rusty flat sedge, scientific name Cyperus odoratus, and this flat sedge is actually considered a rare plant in New England. I think it's really interesting that there are so many species in Florida that are considered endangered or rare in other parts of the world, but they're so abundant here. Next up, we have the groundsel tree, scientific name Baccharis halimifolia, and an interesting fact is that the seeds of the female plant are actually poisonous, so maybe don't eat them. Here we have perennial glasswort, scientific name Sarcocornea perennis, and perennial glasswort has been used as a powder, which is allegedly good for cleaning because of the salt content of the powder. I personally haven't tried it, but maybe I will. I don't know. Here we have saltwort, scientific name Baetis maritima, and an interesting fact about saltwort is that the Japanese actually used the juice of the plant as a diuretic, and the succulent leaves help to retain water. This flower here is called seaside oxeye, scientific name Borachia arborescens, and seaside oxide often hybridizes with another species called Borachia frutescens. So honestly, this could be either one of those or a hybrid of both because they do look very similar. Here we have Christmas berry, scientific name Lycium carolinianum. And Christmas berry is toxic to livestock, and the green fruits of it are toxic to humans. So you can eat the fruits, but only once they're red. Do not eat the green ones. This is buttonwood, scientific name Conocarpus erectus, and this plant actually has a fun fisherman's tale to it. The fisherman believes that if you made tea out of the leaves, it could act as a cure to fish poisoning. Now we're going to move on to our 3 different types of mangroves. So here we have the white mangrove, scientific name Laguncularia racemosa. And the white mangrove actually has 2 glands underneath the petiole, and these glands are where salt is excreted. Here we have the black mangrove, scientific name Avicennia germinans, and this mangrove does have a slightly bigger seed, and it also has pneumatophores, which allow it to breathe when submerged underwater. And our last mangrove is the red mangrove, scientific name Rhizophora mangle, And this mangrove has the biggest seed, and it also, all of these mangroves actually are essential for hurricane protection because they absorb a lot of the brunt of storm damage. Now we're moving on to our animals. We're almost done with the presentation. So our first animal is a green tree frog, scientific name Hyla cinerea. And this frog is known to eat crickets, moths, and flies, and it is eaten by snakes, lizards, and birds. Here we have the Atlantic horseshoe crab, scientific name Limulus polyphemus. And this is actually the only horseshoe crab that is present in North America. And interestingly, it is more closely related to spiders than it is to crabs. Here we have a cute little raccoon paw print. So this is the common raccoon, scientific name Procyon loder. And the common raccoon has that cute little black mask around his eyes that we all know. But what you might not know is that the black mask actually works as an anti-glare device for it. So here we have our other species of vulture, the black vulture, scientific name Corygyps aturatus. And you can actually see on the vulture that's in the clouds, the white tip right at the end, and that's how you can tell that it's a black vulture. And interesting about these vultures is that they have a very poor sense of smell, and they actually follow turkey vultures around for food. And lastly, we have the American alligator, again, scientific name Alligator mississippianus. And our last little fun fact is that alligators can actually go through 3,000 teeth in one lifetime.